Welcome to the initial configuration video for the Juniper JNCIA Junos. The agenda for this video is quite simple. We are going to configure Juniper SRX that I have on my desk with the basic configuration that's needed to get up and running. So it's going to be including things like the root authentication. We're going to put on a host name, we're going to do a domain name, we're going to do the date and time, we're going to do a login banner, we're going to do name servers, we're going to do SSH and Telnet, and the CLI Timeout. Okay, so a new to you Juniper device in factory default configuration will need setting up for basic functions. We will need to configure the basic settings as advised in the agenda to allow you to actually use the device for any sort of packet transfer. So the configuration commands are relatively simple. I mean, most of them, apart from the operator commands here, are done in the configuration mode under the system command. So all of them are under system. Some of them are on system, or some of them are under system services, but they're all there. And we do have the date and time, which is just done in operation mode. So we'd set the root password by going set system root authentication, and we'd normally set a plain text password and put our password in, but of course the device will encrypt the password. So to set up SSH and Telnet is extremely simple. It's just set system services SSH and then set system services Telnet. Now that will allow you to SSH or Telnet to the device. The host name again is extremely simple. It's set system host name and whatever you want as your host name. The domain name is also extremely simple. It's set system domain name and whichever domain name you happen to be using. If you're not part of a domain, then it's not something you need to configure, but if you are, then you'll definitely need to configure that. Your name servers for DNS is again extremely simple. It's set system name server. The time zone, now that's quite interesting. There's a lot of options in the time zone, but it's still relatively simplistic. It's set system time zone, and then you choose the zone that you're in. So for argument's sake, I would choose Europe/London, or I could choose GMT. If you're across the pond, you could do America. And then the login banner is relatively simplistic as well. So it's set system login message, and then you put your message within quotation marks. And then, of course, the last two options that we need to do are under operational mode. So to set the date, it's just set date, and of course it will ask you for the date in the format of year, month, day, and the time as well. And then set the CLI timeout is just set CLI and how many minutes you want it to be, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, etc. Oops, excuse me, I've gone forward too much there. Okay, so following on from this, we're going to do our lab. So in the lab, we're going to use a console connection on a wiped SRX 110 that I have on my desk. You need to bear in mind that from the previous video, the SRX 110 will have some extra configuration on there compared to the likes of a Juniper router. And of course the SRX 110 is quite old. It's been end of life for a long time. So there will be the occasional bug that needs to be worked out, but that's what we're here for. So we're going to go onto the device, we're going to set the root password, the host, domain, and the name servers. We're going to do the date and time, as well as SSH, Telnet, and the login banner. I'm also going to set an IP address up via Dhcp and see if we can connect out to it, to the internet, see if we can ping Google, and then see if we can then actually telnet to the device itself. Okay, let's get cracking with this. For the initial configuration, I'm going to be using my SRX110, that's physically on my desk. I'm going to be using a serial connection to it. So as we can see, if you're using serial connection, as we've got here, you need to I'm currently on COM3. You'd have to use your device manager to see what COM ports you happen to be using if ever you are connecting over serial to any physical devices. But you need to make sure your baud rate is set to 9600. Now that's exactly the same as if you was connecting to a Cisco device. Your data bits need to be set to 8. Your parity needs to be set to none. And your stop bits need to be set to 1. Once you've got those settings in place, you can then click connect and you should be able to connect to your security device or your router or your switch, depending whatever it is you're connecting to. So I'll now have my console connection to my SRX110 and it's been wiped. So as we can see here, we have the amnesiac setting there. So what we're going to do, we're going to attempt to log in now with the standard root login, and we're going to start doing the initial configurations. Let's have a look and see what we can do with this. So root. Okay, so as we can see, we are now in the root login here. So we're using the root user and we have the percentage sign there, which shows we are in the root shell. Okay, so let's do a CLI on that. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to start doing our configurations and get this firewall up and running. We're going to do the 2 commands that we can do in the operation mode, which is date and the CLI timeout. So let's do set and then question mark, and let's do CLI and then question mark again, and we're going to choose the idle timeout option. Okay, IDLE, idle timeout, and it's going to be in minutes, so we're going to choose, let's say, 20 minutes. Okay, so the idle timeout has now been set to 20 minutes. So let's set now the date and see what. So set and question mark is date and question mark again, and now we have the option of either using NTP server, which we've not got set up yet, but I will set one up in a lab environment, or we can just put the time in and date following this format here, which is what we're going to do. So the date is, so we start with the year, so it's 2022, the month is 05 and the day is 11, and it's currently 22, 42 and 00 seconds. Okay, so it didn't like the colons that we put there. However, when I just took the seconds off, as we can see, it's accepted it absolutely fine. Okay, so those are the 2 commands in the operation mode. Now let's go into configuration mode. Now, as we've noticed in the factory default video, the SRX does have some configuration on it out of the box. So it will include things like basic name servers, etc. However, we're going to overwrite those anyway. So let's get cracking and see what's happening with this. So first thing we need to do is set the root authentication password here. So we're going to set system root authentication. Now we have some options here. We can either use SHA, RSA, or DSA. Now this is an older SRX, so there is a couple of other options that we can actually use. We're going to use plain text password. However, the plain text password, even though we're going to type it in plain text, but the security device won't show us this, in the actual config, it's going to encrypt it anyway. So plain text password is just a nice, easy way of doing some authentication. Okay, so now it's asking me for my password. Okay, that's fantastic. So now what we're going to do is set up our SSH and Telnet. So it's again set system services, and if we do a question mark, we can see we have a few things here. We have the likes of our web management, which you'll cover in the JWeb video. We have our SSH. We have FTP if we want to do FTP. DHCP if we want to be running a DHCP server on this particular device. And we have our Telnet as well. So we're going to do set system services, and it's going to be SSH. Right, now we've got some other options here that we can do. So we've got things like rate limiting, which will limit the maximum amount of connections every minute. And we've also got maximum sessions per connection, which will limit the amount of sessions that are actually active. And then we have the connection limits as well, which is the maximum amount of SSH connections that are allowed on the device at any one time. Okay, so we're going to not bother with any of these. We've got this little enter up here, as you can see, which means we can just execute the command. And let's do the Telnet now. So set system services Telnet. Fantastic. And now we're going to do the host name. So set systems host name, and we're going to call it, let's have a look, JNCIA. That's fantastic. And let's try the domain name as well. So set system domain name, and we call it test.com. That's fantastic. So now we're going to add in our name servers, what we want to use for our DNS. So we're going to set system name server, and we're going to go to Google 8.8.8.8. Okay, and now what we need to do is to set our time zone. So let's try this one. So set system time zone. Now if I do a question mark, as you can see, you have all the time zones in the sun. Absolutely loads and loads of them, depending where you are. Okay, I'm in Warrington in northwest of England, but I don't think it's going to have that there. Alright, so we'll just scroll back up. Alright, so we have our GMT times. So if we can't find what we want, we can just go, well, it's GMT or GMT+1, depending whether we have the likes of British Summer Time or not. Or we can choose Europe. Now we have Europe London, and that's probably the closest, bearing in mind I'm 250 miles away from London, but we're still in the same time zone. So let's choose Europe London. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so, and the last thing that we're going to do is our login banner. So we're going to do set system login, and should be message. Yep. And let's do this is a test SRX. Okay, fantastic. Now let's do a commit check to make sure everything's okay. This will take a little while. The SRX 110 is a pretty old device. Okay, so everything's successfully completed. And one thing I also want to do is set my fast Ethernet port for DHCP, because it's connected to one of my switches, which is connected to my router, so we can have a little bit of breakout on that. So let's see what interfaces we have. Run show interface terse. Oh, fantastic. Looks like it's already set up for DHCP out of the box. Fantastic. Don't even have to bother with that. That's great. So let's commit and quit. Shouldn't take too long. Excellent. As we can see now, the host name is now changed to JNCIA, so all the configurations have gone through absolutely fine. Okay, let's see if we can ping out. We set Google as our name server. Oh, there's no root at the moment. I can sort that. Okay, I had to put the DHCP back on my fast Ethernet 00 port. For some strange reason, when I committed the config, it took it off. Okay, so let's see if we can ping out now. Okay, as we can see now, the pings are going fine, so I have internet breakout as well. Let's just cancel that. So what I'm going to attempt to do now is, now I know that the IP address there, I'm going to see if I can telnet into this device. So let's see if we can connect via telnet. So we're going to do a quick connect on port 23 on the telnet protocol. So it was 192.168.1.77. So as we can see now, the session is going okay. So we've got our login banner. This is the test SRX. We can see up here, this is the IP address that we're attempting to connect to, and it's asking us to log in. So let's have a little look and log in and see what we can find. That caret Y, that's when I use my Stream Deck to move between pen mode and normal mode. Let's cancel that. Okay, so it's root and password. Okay, let me just fix this. Okay, so as we can see, we've managed to log in now via telnet. Again, as we can see, we've got the IP address there. We have our login banner. You may notice the username is spelled ROOT, I had to create a new user on it. For some reason, it just didn't want to telnet in on the normal root login details. So I just created a second user, and now I'm able to get into it via Telnet and SSH. Again, the thing is, I'm using quite an old SRX. I think it was end of life 10 years ago maybe. So there is a couple of little quirks to it. Normally this shouldn't cause a problem. But there you go. Looks like everything's working fine. I hope you've enjoyed the video and hope to see you in the next one.